How to handle a budget blowback. The push to change capital gains tax rules for all investments is testing Labor's reform courage. But in some positive news for the world economy this morning, a peace deal between the US and Iran appears to be closer than ever. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. We also have some breaking news this morning. The White House has been placed into lockdown after reports of gunshots fired outside the building. FBI Director Kash Patel says federal agents are on the scene supporting Secret Service as they respond to shots fired near the White House grounds. We'll bring you updates as they come in here on ABC TV and the news channel as well. Well, it began with a social media meme and turned into a flood of complaints, not over changes to negative gearing for property, but over the idea all investments would be hit with new capital gains tax rules. Entrepreneurs and business owners vented their outrage. It was a tough week for the government, but don't expect a complete backdown. Talks have been underway with the tech sector since before the budget about ensuring startups are protected. Any carve-out, though, will be limited. It won't be across the board for all small business. Tomorrow, this battle over the budget will move into the Parliament. And coming up, I'll be joined by Independent Senator David Pocock. It's likely there will be multiple bills rather than just one piece of legislation, allowing time for the difficult details to be worked through.
Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers pushing on with their big budget sell across the country.
This budget is about giving young people a fair crack at home ownership.
A new front line in the budget battle has opened up
as a social media campaign takes off, mocking the Prime Minister's changes to the capital gains tax discount.
Claiming he'll grab 47% of the capital gains when they sell.
I think some of them are very flattering and I thank them for picking very nice photos of me.
They have a new business partner in Anthony Albanese. He's decided to become their business partner.
There are 4 existing concessions and carve-outs for small business, and we're not changing them.
We are all scared what's going to happen next.
We already pay a lot of taxes.
You face every challenge as it comes along.
It's a valid point because that new regime doesn't interact well if you have a really low capital base because you've got nothing to inflate off.
They are under assault. They are under assault. I mean, the Labor Party clearly doesn't like small business.
Surely there's some metaphor here. The bin fire that is this budget.
A group of 40 young business owners writing to the Prime Minister, rather than back us, you have ambushed us.
You work, you risk, you should get ahead.
Australians looking to start or grow a business do it in New Zealand. No capital gains tax.
We announced on budget night that there would be consultation with startups and with businesses.
Where the bloody hell are you?
New figures have revealed a rise in unemployment.
18,600 Australians losing their jobs.
What a terrible time to start taxing Australians more.
The New South Wales Premier's taken a whack at the federal government for not doing enough to cut personal income tax.
You're working Monday, Tuesday and half of Wednesday for yourself and then Wednesday, Thursday and Friday for the government.
That's not how marginal tax rates work.
The Prime Minister says he's changed his mind on capital gains tax. Well, he should give the Australian people the chance to change their mind.
They lied. See, they lied before the election. They said they weren't going to change things, but they lied.
The Prime Minister is reportedly open to changes on a proposal to tax trusts, labelled by the opposition as a death tax.
And there's no measures in there that are going to hurt inheritances.
What we need now is not a carve-out. We need an axe. These taxes must go.
Labor is the party of aspiration, and we will not allow Australia to become a country where aspiration is only for some.
Well, we are joined this morning by Mark Kenny, who is the Director of the Australian Studies Institute, the ANU, Clare Armstrong, Chief Digital Political Correspondent at the ABC, and Shane Wright, Senior Economics Correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Very good morning to all of you. There is a bit going on. We'll keep across those gunshots outside the White House, and we will come to the hopes of a peace deal, finally, between Iran and the US. I know we've heard it before, but there does seem to be a lot more optimism, at least in Donald Trump's language. We'll get to that. But let's start with the budget fallout, Mark. And I made the point that it hasn't really been the criticism around housing and the negative gearing changes for property investment. It's been around startups and small business. Are there legitimate concerns here? Who would be worse off under these changes?
Well, I think that what we're seeing, and there has been it is interesting, the reaction, and as you say, you know, the sort of housing changes have largely sort of scooted through under a bigger controversy. And
people knew they were coming. And
yeah, that's true, but we did expect to see a fair bit of friction about it. It still represented a different position from that which they took to the election, right? So that's significant in itself. But what we're seeing is obviously a lot of special pleading or explanation of how these capital gains tax changes are going to affect small businesses and particularly the startup, high growth, high risk tech sector. So I think, as you said in your introduction, that's where most of the activity is at the moment, and probably it's where there is most likely to be some sort of adjustment.
And Claire, the government did flag that on budget night, that it had already begun consultations with the sector, the startup sector, around what to do here, carve out some special arrangements so they're not hit by what they're doing to every other capital gain. The difficulty, I suppose, is how you ring fence this, where do you draw the line? And as I mentioned, my understanding is this will be limited. This will be limited. It won't be all small business getting some special deal here. They want to keep this just to the tech startups in particular.
Yeah, I think to take a step back for a moment here, part of the government's problem, I'm sure we'll get into this more, is in this communications piece, the explanation, because a lot of what we've seen from small business owners being concerned about how this will impact them, it turns out that maybe they already are eligible for a whole bunch of CGT exemptions and better treatment under the system because of their lower turnover or whatever. So I think that some of this debate is being a bit convoluted, but what we do know is that companies, particularly like a tech startup that has a low start, like basically starts with zero capital and then grows very quickly, if you're being taxed on that gain, that obviously adversely affects you a lot more than a more traditional style company that has a sort of capital starting point that's not zero. And is that fair enough, Shane? There'd be people saying, why should the tech bros get a special deal here, you know, compared to a hairdresser, caterer, someone else starting up from scratch? What is the difference?
Well, I think one of the arguments is that there is some productivity gains or some, it's early for Keynes, but Keynes talked about animal spirits, and the animal spirits perhaps are different between those who think they're going to make a technological breakthrough that change the world rather than someone who's setting up a hairdresser down at the local shops. The risk profile is slightly different. Of course, you're listening to all these tech people saying, I've got the next best thing. The failure rate is between 70 and 90% in the first year of operation. So you've got that, it's really interesting, and the budget was interesting in the terms of the fact that that Jim Chalmers said we are talking about the fight between income and capital, and you saw it again in Albanese's speech yesterday. One of the arguments of the last 20 years is that the shift towards supporting capital is one of the reasons why there's a lot of angry people in Britain, across Europe, across the United States, because of that shift.
And Labor wants to bring that back so that capital and labour are taxed more similarly. But is there still a need for some sort of incentive to take the risk and put your money into an investment?
I think there is, and I think one of the arguments is the 50% concession too large versus, right, we'll have to come up with, we go back to where we were pre-1999, and there are a whole other arguments around what that does to the housing sector, the way that people are very, very creative with their tax systems and their tax arrangements. We haven't even got on to trusts, which is one of the big
We'll get to that.
things. But yeah, that's what's going on in that
Can I
space.
just make a point about this, just in terms of the way the debates happen, though? I mean, it seems to me a lot of it is predicated on the idea that all of these businesses are sold at some point. In fact, that's the intention, to start them up, grow them to a point and sell them. Now, that may be quite common. It may be quite a frequent thing. But it's also true that people start businesses to draw an income from them, to expand them, to innovate. Mark Zuckerberg didn't exactly get rid of Facebook, did he? And it's worked out pretty well for him. So
That's true.
I think, you know, having a debate where it seems to be exclusively about what happens when you sell a business, I think it sort of leaves out all of those other options that one might have for innovation, growth, expansion, employment, dynamism within the economy, animal spirits, as you say, that can be expressed in other ways.
For startups in the tech sector in particular, they need investors, and investors aren't looking for
a payday.
Income. They're looking for when they're going to sell that share, and they want that business to really take off so that it's going to be worthwhile. And a lot of these startups failed, so they're
But if you were a startup investor in Facebook, would you have wanted to bail out early?
In hindsight, no, you wouldn't.
Or Apple?
No, exactly. But I did talk to Kate Cornick. She's the CEO of the Tech Council of Australia for the podcast this week, involved in the negotiations with the government on this very issue, and they have been since budget as well. She makes the point that, yes, we need to be attracting global investors into the tech sector here for these sorts of startups.
Successful founders will see their tax rate increase significantly, and that is a disincentive to operating and starting and growing a startup in this country. So we absolutely need to make sure that we are rewarding that risk.
Rewarding risk, I suppose, is the theme here. Claire?
Well, I might be falsely attributing, but this is just the first place that I saw it. Was in the subject line of an email from Nationals MP Kevin Hogan, a press release that said, you take all the risk and Albanese takes the reward. That's quite a potent political message, I think, that is probably where we'll see the coalition, who are obviously opposed to these tax changes, going. And it's setting up this idea that, yes, you, the individual, do all the work. There's been a lot of talk about how in the early stages of a business or a startup, you're often maybe not paying yourself as much or trying to reinvest as much as possible to kind of improve your chances of getting over that risk of failing. And then the idea that the government at the end of it comes and clips the ticket quite substantially, I think that is politically potent. What will be dangerous for the government is going back to ring fencing. If they're intent on just limiting this to tech, how in itself do you define tech? There are plenty of businesses that might use a lot of AI and innovate in AI to do sort of what we would call more traditional businesses. What if you're an architect or a construction firm that uses a lot of CAD and AI? Is that a tech startup?
It's a good point. Settling that definition won't necessarily be easy, and that's why I don't think we're going to see that settled this week. My understanding is they'll introduce the framework legislation on Thursday of this week and hope to pass it through the lower house next week, so the following week, the second sitting week, and then in the Senate before the end of the whole session, so later in June. But the details on any carve-out for startups can still be worked on, so it won't be in that first bit of framework legislation. You mentioned, though, this campaign that Albanese is going to take half your business, or 47% of your business. I just wanted your thoughts on this whole AI meme push that was very effective during the week. It was clever, it was funny, perhaps misinformation and misleading, but Mark, it's sort of a new style of cheap, effective campaigning to raise awareness on an issue.
And here lay the future. I mean, this is where we're going. Yeah. It's going to be really, really hard, I think, in this kind of, we talk about distributed energy with, wind farms and solar and so forth. We now have sort of highly distributed politics and political messaging, and it's going to be very difficult, I think, for orthodox politics going forward to kind of progress change, to do anything that's complicated. There are always losers when you make change, and if losers can run these sorts of campaigns, and they're not bound by the normal strictures of
Well, there's no truth in advertising for anyone, but they're not bound by being, a major lobby group.
Even by the conventions of politics, which is pretty loose conventions, as we know. I mean, there's certainly a lot of exaggeration and so forth, but they admitted pretty well up front that the 47% claim, or the half of the business claim, was wrong, right? They mostly admitted that, but they said, yeah, but it got eyeballs on it and it got people talking about it. And as you say, it sort of hides within this sort of broader context of being satirical. Okay, all of those things are, let's accept them as arguments, but I think it's going to change politics going forward. I saw a video of Andy Burnham, the putative possible next Prime Minister, the other day, and it was a fantastical thing with him wrestling with someone and losing his temper and so forth. It looked completely legitimate.
Well,
right?
Yeah, and Donald Trump's posting
you couldn't tell
AI images of himself doing all sorts of things all the time.
Yeah, so it's really, really hard, I think, for politics going forward.
I would just take that, though, and say that Labor are flying pretty close to the sun, I think, with their instant dismissal of a lot of the criticism being either misinformation, partisan politics, or vested interests. This is something I've been looking at a lot lately, really spending way too much time in the comment section of every backbench MP's Instagram account. And there are some pretty consistent concerns and complaints, not just about, and we've talked a lot about the CGT impacts on small business, but on investors and particularly young investors. And I think that ultimately it is actually quite detrimental for the government to be dismissing the concerns of young people, whether it's the rent investors, the ETF investors, crypto, whatever it is, to just say you are part of this cabal of political partisans backed by vested interests pushing misinformation.
I think it's a good point. The other argument this week has been, most young people don't have shares or ETFs, or they don't, and that's true.
A lot do, though.
But a lot do, and they can't be dismissive of people.
It's not nearly a majority. Like, we've had some absolutely crazy numbers thrown out, which it actually suggests that there are more people in the country under 25 or 35 than there actually are. And you go, hold on, this is getting...
Sure, but to Clare's point, you can't dismiss.
No, you can't dismiss. But these are vested interests. And this government has said, we're going to tax you more. I lived through the 2010 budget, and the vested interest said they didn't have memes. You had Andrew Forrest on the back of a truck out in Perth, and whenever you take on a vested interest, there's going to be a pushback.
Do you accept, though, Shane, the government does need to do a better job of explaining, well, for small business, we're doing X, Y and Z in the budget, instant asset write-off and all these sorts of things. For a lot of businesses, the change we're making, you'll be better off than you were under the existing. They need to do a better job of explaining some of this.
Goes back to my 2010 example. Sadly, I reread the 2010 budget.
This is the RSPT you're talking about,
The RSPT, right? The resource profit. So it paid for a cut to the company tax, a cut to the personal income tax rate, the standard deduction, which is coming back in, investment incentives for small miners, a change to the tax system for financing, for the financial sector, which was beneficial, plus cuts to interest, tax on interest, all got swept away. And this is because they said, we're going to take on one vested interest, and it was a very powerful and strong...
I think the interesting thing there, and I think this goes to what you're both saying as well, and that is that, yes, you get the vested interest, and those vested interests can be very powerful, and in the RSPT case, it was decisive, right? But I also felt, even back in 2010, that there were a lot of people who didn't really understand the detail, but they saw the government was trying to apply tax. And I think this goes to Clare's point too, that people who perhaps don't even use exchange-traded funds or anything else are looking at this, and they're seeing it as a government kind of reaching in, and they feel ambitious about it, even though they perhaps don't.
Tell you what, I want to show you this. I want to show you this, right? Because if the government can convince people this is a tough decision in the national interest, there may be a way through this. This is a poll from JWS Research that even if it's a broken promise, if it's seen as making a tough decision in the national interest, 50% say thumbs up, 37% say we'd still rather them stick to what they promised at the election. But it's about if they can convince people this is a tough decision. And that's why, bottom line, I know there's been a lot of focus, Clare, on, they're going to back down on this or that. I think largely they're going to tough this out, is the impression I get from talking to senior folks in the government. Yes, they're negotiating on the tech carve-out, and trusts, they're going to take a bit of time towards the end of this year to get that right. But I think largely they're going to hold the line here.
I agree. I think the issue that they are going to have, though, is, people hate the reductive analysis of budgets as looking at winners and losers, but the language around, 12 days ago, whenever the budget was, this was a tough budget that was well and truly overwhelmed by the positives in Labor's mind, like this was their message, of young people getting into a home. So obviously we are not talking about that at all. And I'm not sure that even if we were talking about that, the government would necessarily be winning that argument. It would have been a contested space. But they have essentially got themselves into a position where they won't acknowledge that what they are doing is a tough decision, that a lot of people are going to pay more tax. And they're trying to talk about these vague winners that they haven't defined. They haven't given examples. There have been no cameos, no case studies. I think the only one that I've seen is someone like Andrew Charlton talking about apartment buildings in Parramatta that haven't gone up in value very much or at all in the last 5 years. And under the new CGT arrangement where you only have to pay taxed on the real gain, you'd be better off.
Yeah.
Where is the example like that in every electorate, in every sector, in every income bracket?
Maybe you've just given them a suggestion there, Claire, that we'll see them roll out this week.
I think it's because they didn't expect to get attacked on this.
We're going to move on.
And they'll say otherwise.
Just to update you on the White House situation, the lockdown has been lifted. A suspect, we understand, has been detained and taken to hospital. So that's the latest on that, and we will come to what's happening in terms of the peace deal between the US and Iran. Time now, though, to talk to Independent Senator David Pocock, who's been at the forefront of a campaign pushing for a new 25% tax on gas exports. It is proving to be a popular idea. Well, now One Nation has also put forward its own plans for the gas industry.
Energy policy takes centre stage.
I have a vision for this country, and I think it reflects my gas policy.
We need to get busy digging and drilling.
Pauline Hanson is tapping into voter concerns.
Today unveiling a plan for the government to fund gas exploration in exchange for part equity.
For a 10% tax on offshore gas and oil, while the government would take a 30% stake in future projects.
And divert profits into a sovereign wealth fund.
Australians will have real ownership of their resources.
The best time for Australia to have invested in that part of the industry was 30 or 40 years ago. So that moment has passed.
This has been a policy that I've thought about for a long time. It was based on also what Norway did.
It just speaks to their lack of knowledge of our gas system.
We're done.
Thank you.
Shut up. We're done.
Did you just say shut up?
Yes, I did tell you to shut up.
Look, I did ring Sarah after that and apologise for the shut up comment. It obviously didn't come from me.
The proponents of a new form of gas tax, they're getting cut through in the general electorate.
I don't support putting more taxes on oil and gas.
We have already made our position clear on gas exports.
Senator David Pocock and the Greens Party continue to call for an industry-destroying 25% tax on gas exports.
It is our gas and we want a fair return when it's exported.
These activists simply want to destroy our gas industry and push their green agenda scam. They want gas stopped.
Senator Pocock, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David.
Well, Pauline Hanson there says you want the gas industry stopped. Is she right?
I don't. I just want a fair return on the exports of our gas. And we've seen wide recognition that we're not getting a fair return. There's such broad public support for this. And I think One Nation's announcement at a gas industry conference, which I think is a bit of a red flag if you're getting the red carpet from an industry that's just spent $11.2 million plus stopping a 25% gas export tax. It's recognition that we're not getting a fair return.
Well, that's the difference, isn't it? Pauline Hanson, One Nation, want to help the gas industry expand, open new projects, grow. You don't, do you? Because, I mean, you have said over the years, since you've been in Parliament, you want to stop opening new fossil fuel projects. So you don't want any new gas.
Well, the reality is that people are moving away from gas. And so if you look at International Energy Agency, Department of Industry, all of the projections show a declining demand for gas. We're one of the biggest gas exporters in the world right now. My argument is we should be getting a fair return from the export of that gas and also lowering the price of gas here in Australia. We're constantly being told that we have some sort of shortage of gas. We've got manufacturers here paying more for Australian gas than Japan is buying our gas for. We can solve that through a gas export tax, and I think it solves a lot of those issues.
But I guess that's the question here. Is your motivation here speeding up the end of the gas industry?
No, it's getting a fair return right now. And the thing, the talking points we hear from the gas industry is exactly what they've said in Norway. If you have any sort of mechanism to get a fair return, we won't invest. If projects stack up, they will still invest. They will still export gas, they'll still make a profit, but they'll actually pay the Australian people for that gas. And I think this actually leads into part of the big problem with the fallout from the budget is that right up to budget night we heard, one, we're not changing anything when it comes to tax, and two, we couldn't possibly change the tax settings for multinational gas companies that are making tens of billions of dollars exporting our gas. Turns out you can change the tax settings for everyday Australians. You just can't change the multinational gas companies.
You mentioned Norway, and yes, they do collect a lot of tax from gas, but they also invest a lot of taxpayers' money in gas. And this is the model that I guess Pauline Hanson's talking about as well. The government taking an ownership stake in gas. In Norway, they fund exploration and development. They remove regulatory barriers. A couple of weeks ago, they offered up to 70 new oil and gas drilling permits. That's not the model you're supporting, are you?
It's two very different models, Australia versus Norway. We haven't seen that sort of political leadership over many decades. But the core principle is that a resource belongs to the people. And when it is extracted, you should receive a fair return from it.
But also for the people to invest in that industry and expand that industry. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, we haven't done that.
And do you think we should?
I think if you look across the board, looking at gas and doing that for gas, I think that ship has probably sailed and we need to get a fair return going forward. But we should be looking at things like data centres, AI. You know, that is the future, where we're seeing these huge tech companies putting tens of billions of dollars of investment into Australia, and at the same time minimising their tax here and paying very little tax on revenue. I think that is what we should be looking at. And that's
what, in terms of government ownership? Is that what you're saying?
A mechanism to actually get a fair return. I don't know what that looks like in terms of, is it government ownership or is it tax arrangements where you can't profit shift, where you can't deduct all sorts of payments to tax havens and minimise your tax here. But I think we need to get a fair return from the export of our gas right now, but we need to be looking at all these other industries that we're told are the industries of the future. Critical minerals, AI, data centres. How do we get a fair return from that as Australia?
So what are you suggesting there? That there should be government ownership of critical minerals and data centres?
Well, we're already seeing a lot of money being put into critical minerals. Data centres, I think, is a big conversation that is coming at us. When there's money on the table, how do we actually ensure that Australians get a fair return? Because everything we've seen in the past... I hear the
question, but you're the politician. What's the answer here? Is it government ownership?
Well, I don't have the specific solution to it, but I think it's the principle of how do we get a fair return on resources that belong to the Australian people.
Coming back to Norway, though, just to be clear on this, Norway really tries to speed up gas exploration and development through government ownership. Are you suggesting that that's what should happen here?
Well, we have done that in the past. If you look at the West Australians government's submission to the recent Senate inquiry.
Should we do that now?
There were billions and billions of dollars that they put into the Northwest Shelf. We've seen $1.5 billion for Middle Arm. So it's not like this is an industry that hasn't had support from the government. The only difference is between Norway and Australia when it comes to the principle of whether or not this belongs to the Australian people is that we're happy to get fleeced. If you look at
but the other
projections...
difference, just back to the question, the other difference is that government ownership and involvement in speeding up the expansion of the gas sector. Again, is that what you're suggesting?
That's not what I'm suggesting, no. I think we should have a 25% gas export tax to actually get a return from the gas that is currently being exported. And we're in an energy crisis. These companies are making windfall profits, and the government isn't even willing to put in something like a windfall profits tax.
So just, to your point, the existing PRRT, Petroleum Resource Rent Tax, here's what the budget papers showed. It's collected, it's going to be $1.4 billion in the current financial year. It does go up to 1.9. Then you can see it does drop down over the coming years. So what would your 25% gas tax raise?
A 25% gas export tax, you're looking at $17 billion a year, more in an energy
so 10 times
crisis.
That.
Yep. And the other thing it does is it lowers the cost of gas. Australian gas sold to Australian manufacturers, businesses and households. That is a very good thing. And that would happen almost immediately when you have a gas export tax. And the thing that really annoys people about the PRRT is that you've got the Prime Minister and others saying, no, don't worry, in the future we're going to get a fair return. You look at the budget papers. This year was $100 million less than they'd projected. Out to 2030, $1.25 billion. What does beer excise do? It just keeps going up. 2030, we're paying $3 billion in beer excise. Like, Australians know that we're getting dudded, and yet we see a government, both major parties, who are willing to change taxes for all of us, but not for multinationals that have had it good for so long.
Do you think Labor will shift on this? Because the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has said a couple of times this week when he's been asked about it that the government's priorities for the time being are a domestic gas reservation policy and making sure the two-way supplies with Asian partners is secured, but for the time being is interesting language. Do you see Labor moving on this?
Well, this isn't going away, and I think they're going to have to move on it. As a country that is so reliant on personal income tax, Australians feel that, and yet we're willing to give away big chunks of our gas and not actually do something that is wildly popular across the board. Every single voting cohort supports a 25% gas export tax.
Let's move to what we saw in the budget, where the government is making some tax changes. What do you think about changing the capital gains tax regime for all investments, not just property?
Well, I've campaigned very hard to change it for property, and I think the case has been really well made by the crossbench over a number of years now. Australians understand that we have had a system that incentivises investment in something that we desperately need to be accessible and affordable. And so I think there's broad recognition that that needs to change. The case hasn't been made to extend it to all asset classes. I think that is now the challenge for the government, given that they've, up to budget night, said we're not going to make any changes. They made a change to housing that I think has broad support, at least understanding. But the rest, there's a lot of detail. And you know, I think your podcast with the Tech Council CEO kind of pointed out just some of the details that need to be worked out.
Do you think that sector has a point, that they deserve a complete carve-out or some sort of special deal?
I do, and I really welcome the government's changes to property and their ambition to actually change our tax system, which is overly generous to capital and taxes people's income really hard. And I think just as they've suggested, and as myself and many others on the crossbench have pushed them to do, to use the tax system to incentivise new supply. So you get the capital gains tax discount, you can negatively gear new supply. I think when it comes to businesses, we want to be using it to incentivise startups, not just to start here in Australia, but critically to actually stay here as they scale.
And just tech, or do you think there needs to be some change for other small business, other business investments as well? Where would you draw the line?
Well, I think this is something that really needs broad consultation. I think to Claire's point earlier, we do need to be looking just more broadly than just tech. I think there's some very good reasons that we do want people to be taking a chance and actually building businesses that solve the big challenges of today, but then critically to get them to stay here in Australia, because we've seen so many Australian businesses, a good idea gets gobbled up, moves to the US.
So you would actually have a carve out, go back to the existing 50% capital gains tax discount for all business investments?
I would love to see a very solid Senate inquiry to actually look at this, because it's very complicated. You just have to read Tom Crowley's explainer during the week to realise there is
an excellent explanation.
There is a lot going on here.
Yeah, so you're open-minded on this at the moment. You want to have a proper inquiry to get a better sense of where to draw the line.
Yeah, I've met with the Canberra Business Chamber. I've heard from a number of startups. The ACT has the most startups per capita in the country. So this is something that we've really got to get right. So I'll engage in good faith, and I think the onus is on the government, one, to make the case for the changes they're suggesting, but I think two, to really engage in good faith. And I think that is through a lengthy Senate inquiry where you actually delve into the detail and grapple with some of these trade-offs to ultimately land on a piece of legislation that is going to work.
Well, they want this passed in roughly 6 weeks by the time Parliament rises for the winter break in July. Is that too fast?
I think it is. We've seen this worrying trend in politics where things are just rammed through Parliament rather than actually taking the time to get it right. And in my experience in the last term of Parliament, when you do take things a bit slower, sure, it may get a bit messier, but you end up in a better place because you hear the wide perspective of Australians who are directly impacted, and just more generally what their view is on these changes, and then you can land in a place that you say, yeah, this actually makes sense for us as a country.
When it comes to this broken promise element, you've been one of those campaigning strongly on integrity. You've said government should keep promises made in the lead up to elections. Does that apply here, or do you think this was a promise worth breaking?
Well, as I said, I've campaigned really hard on housing. Like, when we talk about Australians' cost of living challenges and our future, you cannot go past housing. We've got a housing system that is not working. So I really welcome
all that, but you've also campaigned on integrity. I'm just wondering how you would square the two.
Well, without a doubt, it's a broken promise, and that's for them to justify. Right. And you only have to look at the stage 3 tax cut changes in the last Parliament, where, again, the crossbench really led the charge in actually saying these are tax cuts that are not in the best interests of our future. We have to change them to make them fairer. The government then did that and now claim that as a huge win. They point to the stage 3 tax cuts as something that they delivered for Australians. So I think when it comes to housing, the crossbench has done that work. Now that it's extended across the board, it's really up to the government to make the case for why that's a good thing.
So, David Pocock, I'm interested to turn to how you're viewing the political landscape right now, which has been shifting a lot, even since the election 12 months ago. I want to show you this, how the House of Reps looks right now. That's after last year's election. And then this rather extraordinary Redbridge poll that the Australian Financial Review published yesterday. You can see there One Nation just taking a huge chunk of seats, some from Labor, which would be reduced to barely a majority, but a huge amount from the coalition, nearly wiped out. Whether that poll is accurate, it's one poll, but it's undeniable, the rise that we've seen for One Nation. What do you put that down to?
I think there's a lot of frustration, and not just frustration, but anger out there in the community that our political system is not working for Australians. I think there's this recognition that actually on so many of these big challenges we're facing, it's not necessarily left versus right, it's actually vested interests and their stranglehold on the major parties versus the Australian people. And two perfect examples of that are gambling and gas. Where on both things, you have the vast majority of Australians saying, hey, we can see that banning all gambling ads and just getting on with it, protecting our kids, is in the best interest of us. It's something we want you to do. We've got a Prime Minister who bows to vested interests. Same thing's happening on gas. So I think people are saying, how is the system not working for us? It's the major parties who aren't delivering.
But do you honestly think it's gas and gambling that's driving that One Nation surge, or is it migration?
No, I think those are, I guess, symptoms of this problem where we haven't had political parties willing to actually engage in good faith on big challenges that we're facing. And, to migration, in the last Parliament, I put up terms of reference for a Senate inquiry multiple times to say, let's actually have this conversation about immigration. We currently have no plan. We have no plan when it comes to immigration and population, no long-term plan. We've got no plan when it comes to housing and homelessness. No wonder we're lurching from crisis to crisis, where everything is about 3-year election cycles, rather than saying, okay, what's good for us for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years? And what I've seen is major parties who aren't willing to engage in that debate.
What are you willing to do, looking at where One Nation is going? Do you remain an independent? I mean, you've clearly got a national following now and a lot of support on some of these issues like gas. Do you see this moment as a moment where independents like you should be forming a party, or is staying independent more important to you? How do you think about your own future here?
I think it's a big question in the current political climate. As an independent, how do you be part of changing our country for the better? For me at the moment, that is serving people in the ACT, engaging on each issue, bringing solutions, using whatever power I have in the Senate to actually work on behalf of the people that have sent me there. As to what that looks like in the future, who knows? I think we're in a real time of flux politically, and there's people actually looking for candidates who are going to come to Canberra and actually put them first, put them ahead of vested interests.
Well, that's interesting. So at the next election, can you see the prospect of running as part of a party?
Well, at the moment, the thing I'd love to see at the next election is every electorate actually having a viable independent, someone from the community who the communities has said, hey, this person will go in there and put us first as an option. That is good for our democracy when we actually have choice at elections. And I think we saw that here in the south side of Canberra, a safe Labor seat. Jessie Price, a midwife, well respected in the community, not that well known, but got around and people said, hey, this is someone who'll put us first.
Would you run for the lower house?
Well, I think currently in the Senate, there's plenty to do and there's really good opportunities there. That's my focus.
That's not a no.
Well, I don't know why you'd rule something out, but certainly at the moment I'm committed to doing what I'm doing, and my hope is that there'll be really great candidates. And I think, David, that's the thing that I've seen in my short 4 years in politics, is that it's just really about having people who are willing to engage in good faith and put their community first. It doesn't have to be about personality and being able to make great speeches, etc. It's actually about getting in there and doing the hard work. And what I've seen is community independence being able to do that.
But just finally on this, I mean, are you talking to other independents, some of those in the lower house, about whether dealing with what One Nation is doing on the right is better done as part of a party?
Yeah, there's plenty of conversations going on all the time. I mean, this is something...
And you're open to this?
Yeah, I'm always happy to chat about the future of our country. I think there's so many people in politics for the right reasons, and when you're in there, you want to say, well, how do we actually ensure that people can elect people that are going to come here and really deal with the root causes of the problems that we're facing? Because we haven't seen that. You know, you only end up in a crisis because you don't see a challenge and say, okay, how do we genuinely deal with this? You just say, well, let's put it off, let's try and sell some other little things, and then all of a sudden you're in a housing crisis, you're in a biodiversity crisis, you're in an energy crisis. Like, Australians are sick of it. They can see that short-term decision-making is not working for us.
Senator David Pocock, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, David. Cheers.
Well, coming up, migration policy has again become a bit of a flashpoint for the Liberals in particular, a divide between the moderates and the Conservatives on the show. First, let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by the ANU's Mark Kenny, Clare Armstrong from the ABC, and Shane Wright from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Interesting comments at the end there, Mark. This has been a bit of a perennial question for a while, hasn't it? Will independents form a party? David Pocock clearly does have a fair bit of popularity and following now nationally beyond just the ACT where he represents. What did you make of his openness, I suppose, to forming a party?
Well, I think it's fairly consistent with the way he presents himself generally. That's the first thing. So at one level...
Open to considering things.
Yeah, sure. But at one level, we can see it as a kind of a fudging answer. You know, are you having these discussions? Well, I'm always happy to discuss the future of our country. You know, those sort. There's a kind of a political. There's a degree of artifice there, but I think it's less than we get from general politicians. So, you know, he seems to me to be frank and open, and he says, why would you rule things out? You know, I'd ask the question, why would you do it if you're him? I mean, he's already a successful brand. He already has quite a lot of sway. I mean, the numbers in the Senate will determine the extent to which he's pivotal at any one time, admittedly. But, you know, I'm struggling. I mean, there is the point about if he's part of a party, they can get names above a line and on the Senate ballot paper and so forth. Perhaps that's advantageous. I don't know. I just think at some level the parties and media generally are kind of obsessed with this idea of are the independents a party? They're independent, right? And yes, they have that is their appeal. And if they become a party, I think it makes them. It may present some organisational conveniences and economies of scale and these kinds of things, even branding. But it's probably also going to bring some sort of downside.
Unless, Clare, it's to represent, particularly in relation to those TLMPs, independents in the lower house. You know, what the Liberal Party used to be, and we'll come to where the Liberal Party is going on migration. But you heard there from David Pocock a concern about business. You know, ACT has most startups in the country. Want to make sure that there's a wide carve out here, not just for tech, but for business generally. It's a pretty pro-business line compared to Labor. That's kind of a space where you could see a party having some appeal in urban areas in the country.
Well, I mean, we know that it has appeal because the Liberal Party used to exist in that space and appeal and win majority governments, which you have to say sounds a bit far off at the moment. I suppose in a world where you look at the trends in other democracies, particularly in Europe, that have shifted away from a sort of two-party system, the emergence of essentially like a fourth party, I guess, that's like a centre-right, but progressive on environment and other issues. I mean, obviously there's electorally space for that. I'd be interested to see like whether the public, even if it got a taste of that kind of coalition making that happens often after an election where there are multiple parties that have got 20 or something to that effect % of the vote, if after one round of that the public went, oh, actually we like the old system. I'm not saying either way, but I do think that we are closer to that kind of potential experiment happening electorally than we would have been 10 years ago.
I think, and the Redbridge poll goes exactly to that point. It's not just the fact that the Liberal Party has 12 seats with, Dan Tehan's probably the most senior remaining Liberal in the House.
Angus Taylor would lose his seat.
Angus Taylor would lose his seat. And Andrew Hastie is gone. But you get into the Senate where they consume the One Nation, like everybody else. So Matt Canavan actually loses his seat under what those sort of numbers suggest. Like you are going back into the collapse of the UAP and its replacement by the Liberal Party in the 40s, which is where the Teals might have that presence and maybe that's where you could rebuild.
Anyway, we'll see where the
I think the
independents
independents just need to remember what their appeal was originally.
Yeah.
It was that they were not parties.
You're
right?
going to lose some by making that move. But what do you gain on the other side? Let's talk about gas. Shane, hopefully you can enlighten us. The differences between the 25% gas tax that David Pocock and others, the ACTU were in fact the first to suggest this, and Labor at the moment are, well, they're not shutting the door completely, just not now. And then you've got Pauline Hanson's idea as well, which is somewhat different.
Somewhat different. It's interesting because Senator Pocock saying, oh, we'll raise $17 billion from $1.9 billion. Like, people complaining about how the tax hit from the CGT is going to wipe out. I'm sorry, increasing the tax take on top of company tax, outside of that, you go 15 billion a year.
17 billion a year.
Well, but the extra on the PRT.
Right,
but of course, he ignored the issue, which is what actually stopped the government going down this path, is, and you just have to look where Anthony Albanese went last month, which was
Singapore,
to Brunei, to Singapore, talking to China, talking to the South Koreans, talking to Japan.
We had the Japanese PM here.
That's right. There is an absolute big political issue, international political issue, which is you go down this path, the chances of getting fertiliser, of getting diesel, of getting jet fuel
because the export tax is passed on in full. Is that the argument?
Well, the argument is you are changing the arrangements, and this is the issue that got brought up with Albanese, by these other countries saying, hold on, you are changing we have a contract with you, and you're going to change the arrangements right now. Well, we might have to change our arrangements with our supply.
I think it is at once not as simple and not as complicated as the kind of entrenched sides of this debate say. To previously reference the comment sections of every MP at the moment, most of them, if not about CGT and trusts, are about, well, you've gone after CGT and trusts and not gas. So that issue has absolutely not gone away for a huge part of the electorate. And it's not just young people watching Instagram Reels and TikToks. It's really permeated. Obviously, Pauline Hanson has picked that up. She said at the start of her speech this week that Australians are, quote, rightly angry and upset at the way that they are not currently getting a good deal out of their resources. She's also 2 from 2 on saying, right in saying that this idea that the Norway model of just taxing is a solution is actually not really the full picture, because Norway obviously drill and fund a lot of that and take a lot of the risk onto the taxpayer in order to then reap that reward.
She's saying if you want to do Norway, let's do Norway.
I think broadly for the government, there are going to be a lot of hurdles still with the rollout of their East Coast gas reserve. I do not think that is going as steadily along as they would like you to imagine. They tried to do some consultation, I think it was last week, and the stakeholders essentially went, consult on what? You've given us a number.
Not a lot of detail.
There was supposed to be more detail to then build on consultation. Like, it is not set, and I think they have to deal with that before they even get to a tax.
Can I just ask one question, Shane? Why is the 25% gas tax debate conducted different from pretty well every other debate when we talk about rates? It's either 25% or nothing. What's the logic of that?
I'm not sure, because there is an existing tax system, and that includes PRT. It does include, in some cases, royalties, and there's a difference between onshore, offshore, and you've got the company tax system. Like, Chevron is paying, like, as much as some of the critics like to complain, Chevron is paying a lot of tax, company tax out of it. And you can actually see, like you had your figures there, 1.4 to 1.9 billion in PRT. That's because, right, we're assuming that the oil price, gas price goes up and then comes straight down. So much is depending on Donald Trump and the Iranian Guard.
No, it does. So much of the economy depends on what's happening there. I just want to touch on migration, though. While the coalition clearly have been having a field day on the tax front and seem to have a bit of get up and go for the first time in a long time on, looking after investors, migration was the other element of the budget reply, Mark, from Angus Taylor. We're going to, have a historic cut to migration. We're going to take welfare payments away from non-citizens or new non-citizens. But within the Liberal Party this week, we've seen a bit of pushback over that.
Yeah, we have, particularly from Andrew McLaughlin, the South Australian senator, who's rejected some of the language that's around some of this. And I think there are concerns in remnant sections, remnant moderate sections of
Not
the Liberal
large
Party.
swathes of the Liberal Party.
No, but there are still some people who justify the tag of moderate in the Liberal Party, and McLaughlin's certainly one of them, who have genuine concerns about what's being promoted here. And a lot of it is so vague anyway, right? We've got this tying immigration numbers to housing, and we've got this, this restriction of entitlement to welfare and so forth. But the sort of pinning it all together is this idea of Australian values and the Australian way of life, which is a very kind of subjective, amorphous sort of construct, and it means different things for different people. But basically, it's a way of avoiding any sort of detail, really. And as we saw from Senator Nampijinpa Price, it can be, you can make it specific and not in a good way.
No, well, she had to insist she wasn't being discriminatory or racist when she went on a podcast to talk about, with the host who was talking about different groups and flooding Australia and so on. So you can see the risks when you start heading down that path. Look, I do want to talk about what's happening in terms of US-Iran here quickly as well. Here's what Donald Trump posted on Truth Social after a round of talks with leaders in the Middle East. He was sounding optimistic. An agreement has been largely negotiated, subject to finalisation. Details of the deal are currently being discussed and will be announced shortly. In addition to many other elements of the agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. So, yes, we've seen hopes raised before, only to see disappointment follow. But he's held a whole lot of talks, including with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. He's sounding very optimistic. The Fars news agency from Iran, though, is saying that the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iran's management, according to the latest exchanged text between Iran and the US. So Iran might still manage the strait. We'll see how that pans out.
Well, I would just add that further to that, it's dismissed US President's announcement as incomplete and inconsistent with reality.
Okay. Well, we'll see where that goes. And from the reporting in the US, it would be a three-stage formal end of the war, Strait of Hormuz opens, and then deal with the tricky thing of Iran's nuclear stockpiles.
And let's not forget, the idea of ending this with a tollway for the Strait of Hormuz is an utter failure.
It'd be a humiliation.
Utter failure.
The Iranians would argue otherwise.
However, Shane, as far as the global economy is concerned, and the Australian economy and the Australian budget and our inflation rate, which the government's very attuned to right now, this would be great news, wouldn't it?
I'd temper that because we know how long... Look, I'm very cynical about anything because, next week is the 3rd-month anniversary of when Donald Trump said this will be over in 4 to 5 weeks. So putting a pin on that, is that we know how long it is going to take for the flow of fuel to come back through, the amount of damage that has been done to the facilities, LNG facilities particularly. Qatar is really struggling in that space, getting fuel back into the refinery system properly. And it may be, I think the assumption was always you'll still have oil at around $80.
For sure, but if the Strait opens, that oil price is going to start coming down slowly, but it's going to start coming down.
I love that you're a glass
Come on,
half full.
give me something.
There'll be some confidence, right? There'll be some confidence, right? Because we've seen the price come down when people thought there was a deal coming before. If there is actually a deal, then I guess you're right to an extent. There'll be some sort of moderation.
Confidence is insofar as Iran now have a bankable playbook on how to completely cripple the world.
Exactly.
And that now has to be factored into all considerations in the future.
Yep. All right. Just quickly to recap too on the other breaking news this morning, a lockdown has been lifted at the White House in Washington after a number of shots were fired near the building, and journalists working there reported hearing a series of gunshots. They were ordered to seek shelter inside. Officials in the US say a gunman has approached a checkpoint near the White House and opened fire. Police say the suspect's been taken down and is in hospital. And Donald Trump was in fact inside the White House at the time, apparently. All right, our panel, Shane Wright, Clare Armstrong, Mark Kenny, back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers, Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with EP of Arts and Entertainment for the ABC, the one and only Zoe Norton-Lodge, and a very warm welcome, Zoe.
Thanks for having me again.
Budget week is usually the crazy time for the government, but this year it was the week after budget week.
Yes, yeah.
Brett Lethbridge has got the budget jalopy in pole position here.
Yes.
Which, the wheels have come off the budget jalopy.
They have, and you know why? There's the negative gearbox is buggered in that car. But it's funny that they had a head-on collision when they're going full throttle in reverse from their policy, but I don't really know much about cars.
I did love this Mark Knight channeling the Joe Hockey Matthias Cormann budget.
Beautiful.
People are comparing our budget's reception with Joe Hockey's shocker back in 2014.
I don't see the comparison.
No.
This smoke is just promises going up in smoke. It's nothing to do with cigars.
John Spooner is channeling the Paul Keating from 1990. This is a recession that Australia had to have.
This is the regression that we promised Australia didn't have to have.
Yeah.
I'm just impressed that John Spooner got a hold of their passport photo. There's something sad and passporty about it. You know, like no one looks good in a passport photo.
No. Cathy Wilcox, Prime Minister, would you rule out ever making another promise, even if we badgered you to make one about something you couldn't possibly foresee?
I get it. I feel for him. I'm breaking promises left, right and centre.
Yeah.
It's like he should just stick to promises he can definitely keep. Like, there will be no elephant invasions in Australia whilst I'm Prime Minister.
Beautiful, beautiful David Rowe cartoon. It's like some dystopian political Halloween, isn't it?
I know. I can actually see this as like, you know, the new iteration of Halloween costumes, like come as your favourite scare campaign.
That's right. Death, taxes and scare campaigns. There's only three certainties in political life. I love the little subtle two-faced elbow.
I know, yeah. And the little Jim there being like, oh, I don't want to play with them. I don't want to play with death again.
Lovely Matt Golding cartoon. Liberal movie house with the horror double feature of the 2019 election death tax and the 2026 budget death tax.
Why are we always doing this? Everything's got to be a rehash. Like, do something original. We've had the death taxes.
I know.
The 2019 version was way more scary. But honestly, with the cost of popcorn and a choc top and a movie ticket...
Who can afford to go to the movies?
No.
Zoe, it seems like One Nation has gone from a minor party to a major problem for the major parties, hasn't it?
I know. This one to me really just reminded me of that, you know, that Dolly Parton song, Pauline?
Yeah.
You know, Pauline, Pauline, I'm begging of you, please don't take my major party status. It was a huge hit.
Owned and occupied. As Barnaby here is measuring the drapes.
Yes, he is, and he hasn't measured his pants.
No. Matt Golding's cartoon, I like her because...
He says...
What she thinks. It's very pointed.
It is.
Always a good look when your National Security Minister is seen triumphing over prisoners, let's say. I did love Cathy Wilcox penny here.
Yeah.
We call on the Israeli government not to treat the Samud flotilla activists the way they treat Palestinians.
I mean, it's amazing she's included real photographs in this one, isn't it? You can't really look away.
Yep. Fiona Katauskas. One is hell-bent on further damaging Israel's reputation and the other is trying to deliver aid to Gaza.
Yeah.
As the flotilla crew and Benny Gavir waving the flag.
It actually looks like a political cartoon in action, that image, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Zoe, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week, even though the events have been pretty ordinary.
Indeed.
I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Just a quick one. Treasury Secretary Jenny Wilkinson is giving a speech and taking questions on Thursday at an event at the Australian Business Economists. I reckon there'll be a lot of attention on the Treasury Secretary in going through the details of what's in this budget.
And I will be there. This week, unemployment rate came in at 4.5%, and it scared everybody because it went up and there was a drop of about 18,000 jobs. The market pricing for an interest rate rise this year has almost evaporated. Like it's down, like we have to wait till December. Now there's a 66% chance of rate cuts in the second half of next year. The global economy is getting worried about Donald Trump and the war in Iran and what it's doing to growth.
Interesting. Claire?
I'm going to zoom out and put my international relations undergrad to a bit of use. There's an Ebola outbreak that began in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've seen reports about 170 suspected deaths, 750 cases, according to the World Health Organization. aid agencies already linking the sort of blindness to the immersion of this outbreak to huge cuts to aid, particularly US aid, the US withdrawing from the World Health Organization. We've spent a lot of time in recent months talking about middle powers and the contribution that they can make. I don't think anyone over the age of 12 in the world needs to be reminded the impact that something like a pandemic can have on their own lives, on the security and economy of their own countries. When I think this budget, Australia's donated about $5 billion, which is only about 0.2-ish% of our gross national income. The UN target is 0.7%.
It's a lot higher than 0.2. All right.
This week we got a glimpse into the way Israel treats prisoners. It was an appalling, some appalling vision. The cruelty of it, the lack of, the breach of human rights and so forth was astonishing. I think we're past the time where we should be describing Israel as a liberal democracy. I mean, there are plenty of supporters of Israel, and I would say I'm one of them. But, you know, the response from Netanyahu to say that he doesn't support this extreme minister, Ben-Gvir, but not do anything about it, I think says everything about where Israel is.
Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Plenty to chew over as the budget fallout continues. Finally, there were plenty of hard hats and high-vis vests for Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers selling the budget. Richard Marles tried to pull his weight too, but not all photo ops are easy. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I'm doing it the wrong way.
Demonstrate, I'll help you.
Down at the chest, is it? Down at the chest?
Yeah. That's it, so you just pull straight down to the chest. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Look at the arms on him. All right, get in there, get him up there.
I've got runner's arms.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.